So why is the federal government really flooding the zone with immigrants? Why are they doing this when any rational decision maker would say, well, every one of them is getting a healthcare card? We know that waiting lists in Canada have never been longer. Basic routine surgeries like getting a hip replacement, things like that, you can wait 2 to 5 years getting a hip replacement. I mean, it's just outrageous, like chronic pain.
Yeah.
Um, where are people going to live? I mean, this is just a really basic thing. So the federal government opens it up. They don't really have any responsibility at the operational level, like the local and provincial levels of government do. Why is the federal government doing this?
Well, there is the theory that that people will be grateful that you, under your leadership, they were admitted to Canada and given some opportunity, so therefore they're
Hmm.
going to vote for you. So that idea we hear, why doesn't Joe Biden deal with what's clearly a crisis at his border? Oh, he's actually just bringing in Democratic voters. I mean, maybe I'm naive on this, but I'd like to think that that's just not really what's motivating it, because it's such a
Hmm.
recipe for disaster, and it would be
Yeah.
such a cynical way for them to behave. But that's obviously one possible
Hmm.
reason behind it all. And I also think it doesn't necessarily work. I think it would backfire. As I said, a lot of new Canadians going, wait, what on earth is going on here? This just isn't working. They get frustrated by it. Many stories of new immigrants who are really in dire straits here, and
Hmm.
I don't think they're necessarily like they can be coming as an economic class of immigrant. I don't mean
Hmm.
refugees, so they can be coming with a job and thinking, oh
Right.
great, I got this $80,000 IT job. I'm going to be doing great. And then they realize,
Hmm.
what, 80,000? It's actually not helping me out that much in Toronto because I
Hmm.
can't get around and the rent's so expensive. So I'm never going to be able
Hmm.
to save to buy a house. What am I getting myself into here? So I don't think that those individuals are going to be liberal voters for life. I understand
Hmm.
there's a bit of Pierre Trudeau nostalgia around that, but I think the
Hmm.
situation was different. I don't think that applies now. So it's total recklessness. I also think there's other cynical politics with the idea that we will have large immigration numbers, and then our political opponents will criticize them, and then we'll call them mean
Hmm.
and racist. So therefore, we
Exactly.
can beat
Yeah.
them out. And again, I would really hope that we're not making major policy decisions like that for these sort of like cheap gotcha moment cynical reasons. But hey, maybe we are, David. So that would be
Well,
truly disappointing, but maybe we are.
let's hope you're wrong. I mean, it's really quite disturbing how these decisions, if you care about your nation, how would you ever rationally make these decisions that are hurting people left, right, and center in this country? I mean, it's very disturbing. So, speaking of decision making, I want to talk about, you know, the challenges in our country and certainly local government from the point of view that you are an experienced journalist, Anthony. You've been studying these issues for a long time. And journalism plays a very important role in this country where we are able to look at the facts of issues, bring information, evidence to decision making. And it's a very important part of a free and democratic society. It's one of these pillars within a high functioning free and democratic society. So, how has journalism changed in your mind over the years and impacted the local democratic process?
Oh, David, it's a great question, and it's a big one, and unfortunately, the answer is not a positive one. I said I'm an optimist. I'm not so sure about being optimistic on the media front. How journalism has changed, it's changed in a number of ways in recent years. One key factor is that journalism used to be considered a trade, and like with many trades, the workers would more identify as blue collar.
Hmm.
Journalism was kind of considered more of like a working man's line of work. It's recently become an elite profession for a number of reasons, and I think that's changed the attitude and the tone that people bring to journalism when they enter that. So I think a lot has been lost there. Then you obviously have the technology challenges where most media outlets are having major monetization problems. So they're cutting
Hmm.
staff just because that's the reality. I mean, I'm familiar with the balance sheets of all these outlets, and they're not doing it to be cruel. They need to do it. And then the
Yeah.
challenge becomes you have fewer people covering these different beats. So to our point about all politics being local, people are not. You'll have a person sitting at a desk basically churning out many news stories a day that are really just kind of summaries of what people said on Twitter, or snapshots of what people said at question period, but they're not able to go out and cover what's really going on with crime. Let's check that
Mm,
out. What's going on
okay.
at the school board? So how we talked about earlier, things have been happening at your school board that you don't approve of. How did this happen? Why don't I
Hmm.
know about this? Well, it
Hmm.
was, you could have known about it in the past. There were
Hmm.
reporters who we used to hire people in media who would be the school board reporter. That was a thing.
Hmm.
That is
Hmm.
long gone. That doesn't happen anymore. I also know for a fact that journalism schools, unfortunately, teach people more activist journalism now, that you need to be a part of the story and you need to do your own sort of lobbying and activism in
Hmm.
how you
Hmm.
approach the beat. So there's not that much different from a journalist and a Twitter warrior in many cases. It's quite unfortunate. So I think a lot of things are transpiring. There are new models coming out. There's exciting things. Substacks have allowed individual voices
Hmm.
to be empowered, but we don't need that many more opinion writers out there, as much as there are amazing opinion writers. Really, we need people to go out there and do the frontline work and the sleuthing and get the documents and tell us about what's really happening in our daily lives. And that's what we're missing right now.
I think you're right on, Anthony. I recall certainly when I was an elected official, I really was so appreciative of the local media and how consistently they covered whether it was local councils, school boards in great detail. Like you could tell they were getting into the details of those agenda. And if you don't get into details, you miss everything, ultimately. And so, yeah, no, I think you're right. There's a huge vacuum there, and that's a shame because that's where local democracy occurs, right? Is digging down deep into the story and then being able to hold people to account and opening up discussions with the community. That's empowering. So I think that's a great vision, Anthony. So Bill C-63, the so-called online harms bill, it's kind of almost like two bills. One is a kind of a head fake, in my opinion, where the first part is really about claiming to protect children from online harms when we have existing laws already, I would argue. So it's kind of cover. It's something that, you can't really argue against in some measure. But the second part of it, does that concern you where it's going to have major implications on basically naming anything that you as a radical activist disagree with as quote hate speech and using that as a weapon to shut down freedom of speech?
Oh, absolutely, David. When we talk about things coming in cycles, we've had this argument before, not too long ago, 15 years ago or so. Mark Stein was brought before Canadian human rights tribunals and
Yes.
provincial human rights tribunals for some writings in Maclean's magazine that he was writing about from his book America Alone. I think the articles were talking about Islam and demographics,
Indeed.
and you would have read his pieces and maybe you liked him, maybe you disliked him, maybe you
Hmm.
agreed, maybe you disagreed, but hey, he was just writing these pieces.
Hmm.
He potentially faced major financial penalties for them, and what resulted in that was repealing these parts of the laws that were very mushy in terms of, oh, if writing could basically offend someone, if it could make them feel that they were potentially exposed to harms. I don't have the
Yeah.
exact wording in front of me, but it was this really sort of mushy wording. It's like, no, not acceptable. We got to get rid of that. We're just coming back to that now, where people certainly could be harassed or lose their homes, lose their livelihood over an activist saying, let's get them, boys. We don't like what they've written. So we do not need this legislation at all. And David, as you said, there are existing laws on the books. It does seem that we have a major scourge in terms of child abuse and child exploitation, but we have
Hmm.
laws on the books. So if there's an argument that we need 10 or 20 or 100 more RCMP officers seconded to
Hmm.
that file, then I'm all in support of that. Let's talk about that resource allocation, but we really shouldn't use those sort of examples as a cheap excuse to bring in political censorship. It is incredibly alarming. Generally speaking, there are things that are already illegal, and let's take them to the real courts so that, sure, if someone, like we've known for years, for decades, people can't call you on your landline and threaten to harass you or kill you or
Hmm.
whatnot. You can get legal
Hmm.
recourse. Likewise, I think now if people are DMing you on Twitter and Facebook and threatening to abuse you, well, I think you definitely should have the right to call the police. So go ahead and do that. And I think they're now learning what digital harassment really means. So we're getting up to speed on all that, but it doesn't mean someone saying a mean tweet towards you.
Mhm.
I mean, if you can just, and I think we need to promote resilience more here. It's rather tragic to see teenagers get really caught up in this, and some extreme examples of people committing suicide over stuff in the online realm.
Mhm.
But you are not responsible for what other people say. You're not in charge of what they say, but you're responsible for how you respond. So making sure we understand that. Look, if someone's saying some stupid or offensive or racist thing online, well, that says more about them than it does about you. That person's a loser, and just ignore them. I mean, I tell my kids that kind of stuff. That's the situation we're in right now. We don't need Trudeau to come in and create a digital safety commissioner, which he wants to
Yeah.
do, who's going to
Yeah.
dictate
Unbelievably.
what happens on the internet. It's very, very alarming. So, I've always been polite and well mannered online, and I think other people should as well. But if someone is being a little rude, well, okay, we don't need laws for that. If they're doing something illegal, then by all means, let's charge them and fine them. There's zero tolerance for that child exploitation. What these Trudeau bills have to do with this? Nothing. I mean, it's really disturbing what he's planning to do.
So is it really basically using law then as a weapon against your political opponents again? Like, is it kind of, to use the term lawfare, using the law to essentially harass your people that you don't agree with?
Yeah, that seems to be the case because what are these phrases online harms? What are you really talking about here? How do you rigorously define them in a way that would hold up in an appeals court or up in the Supreme Court? And I think we'd find in a lot of cases they just don't
Hmm.
hold up.
Exactly. Well, it certainly underlines the importance of the freedom of speech. To be able to protect those basic foundational rights and freedoms is really critical for our democracy. And so related to that, though, I do have the questions. We kind of get to the end of our really what's been a terrific discussion, Anthony, is really about action.
Mm.
What do we need to do in terms of policy? You've talked about basically the need to improve local government, but if you were at a federal provincial level, are there policies that you would advocate for to help empower and strengthen local government?
Wow, great question. There's definitely a lot of provincial and federal policies I'd like to see come to pass. In terms of what other levels of government can do to empower communities, I think part of it is just to stop poking around into cities' businesses in a way that holds them back. I think we have a lot of that. I've definitely heard from so many job creators in Toronto who are troubled by this capital gains
Mhm.
tax that's been brought
Indeed.
in. I don't
Yes.
think Justin Trudeau and Christy Freeland were expecting the incredible blowback, not from billionaires who they wish to
Hmm.
vilify, but from regular aspirational middle class people. Speaking of myself, me and my spouse, neither of us are public servants, or we're not with big blue chip companies where we have defined benefit pensions that we'll get to enjoy later on in life. So we have a rental property that is kind of our pension, that we'll use later on.
Yes.
And now and I felt like that was just the financial choice that we were making, choosing to put
Mhm.
the money there rather than an RRSP. And now I'm being told by Krista Freeland that like I'm a bad guy or something, that I did something wrong, and we're going to change the rules mid-game to penalize me because how dare I? And I'm just trying to provide for my wife and I in our retirement years. What did I do wrong? So that kind of stuff, I think, really does affect local economies.
I think you're right on. And that's just one issue, Anthony. I mean, if you look at
Right.
the capital gains issue, I mean, that is going to hit everybody. It's almost like they're on a mission to destroy the middle class, to disable them, to both in terms of an economic future. I mean, I just hear this from so many people in the next generation. They don't really see hope for their future in this country, which is a real shame. I mean, it says that we really have a lot of work to do to turn around this country. So as you look to our nation, where are you seeing the signs of hope? I mean, you've alluded earlier to the changing discussion. What are you seeing from your point of view?
I am seeing signs of a revival of civil society. We have seen in the past decades the growth of the bowling alone thesis, that idea that people stop being involved in community groups and Rotary clubs and
Mhm.
sports leagues like bowling. So now people bowl
Yes.
alone rather than in a group, where the phrase comes from. But we are now seeing people say, actually, I'm gonna put down the iPhone. I'm gonna go out and I'm gonna go to the pub night where we're talking about cleaning up our communities and safe streets. So I'm going to rally together with my neighbors to make change. I'm going to get involved in the school system. I'm going to some friends and I are going to run for school trustee to bring about change. So I do see a revival of civil society, because you know the saying, David, big government makes for small citizens, and people are realizing they've been pushed out without even knowing it, but they want to reclaim their space, and hats off to them.
I like what you're saying, Anthony. So let's get involved and speak up and engage. And Anthony, it's been a real pleasure to have this conversation with you. And I want to thank you for your work as both a journalist and for having the courage and commitment and care for our country to be involved and to run as a electoral candidate as mayor in the city of Toronto. Thank you for joining us.
Oh, thanks so much, David. It was my pleasure.
Thank you.
Without open discussion and debate, you're not thinking, nor are you free. Comment below. We'd love for you to join the conversation.